God's good. It has been great to be with you, and God has helped me more than He can help you, I think. He's helped me so much in sharing. And tonight, I want to just take a moment. I have always said, and I've said this a couple times already, that when God helped me through some situations and some things that I've gone through in my life, as a very young man, actually, I told God, I said, I will share it every time that I have a meeting, a series of meetings or a time in which I can share and be open, when I'm not just singing the song or doing something of that nature, but when I'm speaking at all, that I will always share what you did for me. And so I see the big, I have a bunch of kids at school today, and about 5 or 6 of them says, I want to come and hear your testimony. And I said, well, I'm doing it tonight. And they go, oh, we get double credit for being at the thing with the candidates tonight. And so they're all excited about that. So they said, you have to share it again. And I told them I would share it on campus sometime for them. But there was several of them that were talking to me and wanting to be a part of it tonight. But thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for praying for me. As I share, I just share my heart. And, of course, I use God's word, but I just share my heart. But as a young man, I grew up in a household that was divided. My mom went to church, Little 3CU Church in London, Ohio. My mom and dad met in London, Ohio, at Isley's Ice Cream Shop. I don't know how many of you will remember when that was, but it was a long time ago. And my great-grandmother, my grandmother were 3CU, loved the Lord, and went to these small churches. Marysville had a small church at that time. They have a much bigger church now, but Marysville had a little storefront church. And so as a child, I would go to those churches. I would go, we lived in Irwin, Ohio, and nobody knows where Irwin is, but it's a little tiny burg between Mechanicsburg and Marysville. It used to be a truck stop, and when they built Route 70, no trucks went through there anymore. So they had one big building and gas station, and they made a grocery store in it, and then later they had a pool hall and a couple things in there, but they had one big building and a bunch of little houses around it, and that's it. That's all there was there, and farmland. So as I was being raised, I lived there in Irwin, and my mom would take me and sit me on the front pew, and you know how she sang with a trio with 2 of my dad's sisters, and we would have to sit there, and they would bring me up, and when I was about 4 or 5 maybe, but a real little guy, and they would bring me up and stand me on, they had my grandmother had a little sewing stool, okay? It had pads, and she would stick pins in it, stuff like that. Well, whenever they were going to sing, they took all the pins out, and they brought this little thing because it had a handle, and they would stand it so that I could be almost up to their shoulders when I sang, okay? So that's where my singing started, and I started that, my mom. My dad was raised with a Christian mother. Several of my aunts went to church, and his sisters, he had 6 sisters. 2 of my mom's brothers married 2 of my dad's sisters. So I have a whole bunch of first cousins that are actually double cousins, 22 of them. And so we have the same bloodline on both sides. So we are just like brothers and sisters, even though I haven't seen many of them in a long time. It's one of those things that it's just like you saw them yesterday every time you see them. So as we were growing, my mom would take me to church. My dad refused to go to church. I don't mean he just didn't go. He refused to go. He would take my mom to church and sit in the car. My mom did not drive ever from up until, she never drove, owned a driver's license in her life. And when my dad would take her places, he didn't like crowds. He didn't care to go in where people were, and he did not go in anywhere. He didn't go in the grocery store. He was a farmer, and that's the way he was. He just didn't like to do that. And so as we grew up, my dad took a job. He was doing some carpentry work here, and he took a job over in Dayton. And so we moved to Beaver Creek, Ohio, like I told you last night. And I was about 8, maybe not, no, maybe. I'm trying to think it was 58 or 59, but I was about 7 or 8. I don't remember exactly when we moved. And when we did that, there's 4 of us boys, and my sister right in the middle, so there's 5 kids. And my dad and I were so much alike. I told you that last night. We just butted heads. I mean, none of you have fathers like that, I know. But I worked with my dad after I got out of high school. I worked with my dad for a long time. And we just couldn't even stay in the same room without saying one saying black, the other saying white. It's just the way we just couldn't. No matter how hard we tried. We might not say anything for an hour, but as soon as we said something, we were fighting, And so that's just the way it was. When I was growing up in high school, my family loved sports. We played a lot of sports. My dad was a big sports buff. And my junior year in high school, I tried out without him knowing about it because he wanted us to work when we got home from school. I tried out for a school play, a school musical. My choir director at school had been working with me as far as singing. He said, "You really need to try this." And so we tried out for a musical, and I got a part in the musical. My dad was not happy about that, but I sang in high school for a little while. When I got out of high school, right before I got out of high school, I told my dad I was going to leave home. We just couldn't get along. He said, "You can't leave till after you graduate because your mom, it would just break her heart." I said, "Okay." And so we didn't. But the day that I graduated from high school, I had a 1960 Studebaker Lark. Yeah, I know, a real hot rod, right? And I put everything that I owned, which probably could go in that little suitcase that I carry for my guitar, everything I own in it, and I left. I had rented an apartment months before, and I remember it was $90 a month, and that included utilities. So, to give you an idea. So I moved out. Not too hard. Enjoyed the freedom at first, and then you know how young men they kind of try to push the boundaries a little bit and things. But just before I did that, I was saved. I shared with you last night. I was saved I was walking to school, and a young man asked me to ride if I needed a ride because it was pouring down rain, and went with him. I began to go to church with him and was saved in their youth group. Asked the Lord to come into my heart, and a good solid conversion. God was working in my life. I met a young lady there at the church, and I had moved out of high school now, and we were dating, and we were married later that year, the year that I graduated from high school. And so Patricia and I were married. She had been in the youth group of this church and been raised in it, and so she knew a lot more about church than I did because I'd been in church when I was little, but as I got older, I kind of gotten away from it and began to go back. And of course, God saved me, and it was just wonderful. We were married, and 2 years later, we had a little daughter. And Heather, the one that we requested prayer for tonight, was born. And a year later, we had another little daughter, and her name was Holly. And so we had 2 little ones, young couple. I'm 22 years old now, have 2 kids. I'm working as a carpenter, trying to get into the union because it paid more money. And I was also working at a gas station, and I worked at another little Panel Town, it was called. It was a little place where it sold paneling and things like that. So I worked 3 jobs, little nitpicky things, just trying to make ends meet. After right before Holly was born, I began to sing with a young gospel group. A fellow heard me sing at a banquet, a Valentine's banquet, and asked me to try out for this group. So I began to sing with them. And it was a mixed quartet, 2 girls, 2 guys, and we had a band. We had guitar and piano and drums and a bass. And I didn't really play much guitar. I had gotten a little guitar when I was 17. My aunt gave me one, and I was trying to learn to play it, but I hadn't played much right then. Began to play more as I sang with them for 7.5 years. And so all of this now, 2 kids, we got a chance to buy a house in Xenia, Ohio. So it was a 245, 235 loan program where low-income families could put their name in a hat, basically. And if you qualify, if you would pre-qualify, and we did, we went and qualified, then they basically had about 6 or 8 homes, and they would give whoever was first on the roster would give them a first chance to buy it and then go down through. Well, we got one of the small homes, and we bought it in May of 1973. So we moved in. Man, just happy as everything can be, 2 little ones, and things are just going great. I'm helping lead worship in a church there, and traveling with this group on the weekend some. Not so many Sundays, but a lot of Thursday, Friday, and Saturdays. Travel with several different groups, and it was like a circuit, and it was just great. Early 1974, we were building a garage on the house that we had bought, and I came home one afternoon. I got home about 3:30. And at that time, it was, the weather was just weird. It was just really heavy thunderstorms, and then it would be real sunny, and then it was real heavy thunderstorms, and it would be real sunny. And in 1974, we didn't have the elaborate radar. I mean, you didn't turn on the TV and see all of this stuff on the screen, and this is this is forming, and we've got all this stuff going on. But what we did hear was about 4 o'clock that they were giving tornado warnings. There was no sirens or anything like that, but they were giving tornado warnings on the TV that there was a chance or possibility that tornadoes could form. There had been some earlier in the day in the Midwest, and we'll find out later that there were 148 tornadoes in the country that day, and that today it stands as the second most tornadoes ever on one day. Until just about a year ago, there was one day that they had more tornadoes. But I got home from work. It was sunny. Got out the bike. I was going to do some bike riding, and we said, well, it looks kind of like it's starting to cloud up again. We better not do that. So we had the kids. We were playing in the backyard. I came inside, and when I looked through the house, it was like a side yard. When I looked through the house, there was a sliding glass door at the back. There was this cloud. Why don't you put up that first picture you've got back there? There was this cloud. We lived on a street, and there was a street behind us, and then there was an open field because it was a brand new subdivision. And this isn't my picture, but this is very close to what I saw. And it was about 3/4 of a mile to a mile. We checked it later, about 3/4 of a mile away. Okay? And so I had never seen a tornado, but that's pretty defined. If you've ever heard of a tornado, that's what it looks like. And so I immediately got the kids inside. Everybody always said, go to the middle of the house, go to the middle of the house. The neighbor kids, 2 neighbor kids, and their mom were at our house. We got in a small bathroom that was, 5 feet where the tub was, and probably 5 or 6 feet the other way. We had a medicine cabinet. I took out the mirrors. My daughter had a little twin bed, and I reached in her room and pulled the mattress in, and all of us were in that bathtub, and I pulled the mattress. As I pulled the mattress over my head, you could begin to hear the roar and all of the debris falling. You can go to the next picture. When I got up, it was only about 3.5, that one. It was only about 3.5 minutes, the total time of the sound. But we could hear debris and things starting to hit. And this is an area, this is in Xenia, but this is, it's already come through the plat that I'm in where this picture's coming from, but there was debris everywhere. And so I huddled back down, and about another 2 minutes or so about 5 or 6 minutes altogether, when I got up, I could see it just looked like a junkyard. As far as I could see, I don't know, you can go on to the picture you were just at. It was only about a half a mile from my house, and this is over top of one of the houses right when it was forming. Can you go back the other way? Okay, yeah, this one here. This is a semi-truck that's on top of a store that was about a quarter of a mile from my house. This, for Lynn and them, I don't know if they've seen all these pictures, but this was right at near the bowling alley where the Frisch's used to be. Not where it is now, but Perkins would be sitting there right now. And so this is a semi-truck on top of a Kohler. So, and anyway, to let you know, none of us were hurt. I mean, we were shaken. But when I pulled up the mattress and looked out, it was just devastation. And there was crying, and we ran over and helped some people dig out from under their houses and several things. Well, my car, we were just right at the end of the destruction. It seemed like from my house on, it took all of my house except for 2 walls. There were 2 walls standing. One of them was the bathroom wall that we were in. And we took our car, because my parents lived right on the other side of town and headed for the other side of town. We helped dig some people out of rubble to find everybody. Come to find out, our neighbors right straight across the street, there were 5 people killed in that home. There were 33 people killed in Xenia. This was an F5. They said it should have been an EF5. They estimate the winds were 238 to 260, somewhere in there, miles an hour. It's the second largest tornado recorded on record in the United States. There were 12,000 people hurt, but 33 killed. And there were about 70% of the downtown area was completely gone. I had a brother that was hurt, and that's a different story, but we were able to find him and get him to a hospital. But through that, you don't think about anything. It just goes and goes. Your mind's just racing to get to family and help them and all that's going on. So God brought us through that. We did not even have a nick. I mean, not a scratch. And yet God brought us through that. And so we gathered our little family. We rebuilt the house that we lived in. And 2 years later, my daughter Carrie was born. I was still singing with the group, traveling with the group. Now I had a better job with the union doing carpentry work. And so things were going really well. A year later, my son was born. So now I have 4 little ones, okay? 4 little ones, and living in the home. My daughter Carrie was really sick when she was born. She had a lot of fluid in her lungs. We don't have the technology that we do today, but yet she was doing well, but she had a lot of medical bills. We had no insurance. So we sold the house that I rebuilt and moved just around the corner. I mean, you could actually throw a rock from the house that we lived in a tornado to the 1.5-story house that we bought around the corner. That was 1979. September 6th, 2:03 in the morning, 1979. I was awakened out of sleep. Smoke-filled house. Could not see. My wife woke me. The smoke alarm was just beeping, but my wife awoke me, and we could not even see each other, even though we could touch each other. And she said, "I'm going to Holly's room." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "I'll go to Heather's," because Heather's room was, we had a 4-bedroom house. We were upstairs, and there was smoke everywhere. You couldn't see where you were at all. And so we began to go through the house to find the kid. and I found Heather kind of ran to me. So I found her immediately, went to Jeremy and Carrie's room, and there was a stairway, and the flames were coming up through the stairway. We couldn't see anything except just the flame. And I knew Carrie's bed was on the other side. It was just like a doorway. When it came to the top of the stairway, there was a door on each side. I reached around like this and picked her up out of her bed by her night clothes. And Jeremy, Heather was with me. I grabbed him and she took him. And he was little. His birthday was October 11th, so he was not 2 years old yet. So we hurried to the window. I got them out on the garage roof, got them down, but no sign of my wife or Holly that had gone to the other side of the house. So I went around trying to get into the other side of the house. Come to find out that smoke inhalation, they told us at the hospital they did not get out. And smoke inhalation had gotten them as soon as she got into her in that room. And they perished. Holly was 6. My wife was 27. My world was over, done. You can imagine, there wasn't anything else that I could do. I was serving God. I was leading worship at a church, traveling, giving His word, and this happens. What do you do? How can this happen to someone that serves a God that is all-powerful, that's all-knowledge, that knows what is going to happen the next moment? And yet, how can this happen? I was so angry. I was mad. I cried. I screamed. Little Carrie had burns all along her side, on her face, her hands. Still today, she has a little scar on her hands. And we had little surface burns, but nothing major. Little Carrie was 3. They took her to Shriners Hospital in Cincinnati because they have a special burn unit there. And I remember little Carrie was the only one of the kids that wasn't present at the funeral for my wife and daughter. And I remember little Carrie, when I walked in the room, each day they would put her in what looked like a bathtub. And they had a solution that they would put over her, and they would peel her skin off so it would not scar. She would not let them do it, but she would let Daddy do it. So every day for 46 days, she was in there almost 80, but for 46 days, every single day, I walked in, 3 years old, she would stand up like this and say, "Okay, Daddy." And I would peel the skin off of her face and off her left arm. And I was so mad at God. I would drive from Xenia to Cincinnati, and I never cursed. I never was one to use a lot of curse words. But if you could curse in your heart, I think that's what I was doing. I couldn't imagine that God would allow such thing to happen to people. And I know things are happening in your life. And I know that you've been angry at God. And yet, in all that was going on, I knew God was still God. So I would pray, and then I would scream and yell and cry. And I would pray, and I would scream and yell and cry. And I had 3 children. Carrie was starting to get better. It just was, the whole reality was starting to set in. I had this home that I had to do something with. I finally just sold it. I couldn't go back in there. It just so devastating that if anyone could be mad at God, I was mad at God. And I didn't, but yet God understood. He knew. It took time, and as time began to heal my heart, I began to see that God doesn't do those things. I don't even know if you can say that God allows them, even though we know that God is omnipotent. He's all present. He's all powerful, that he knows. He's omniscient. We know that he's in control. But how do you look at it? And I searched the scriptures and I looked, and God began to show me that he created a perfect world. And in the garden, sin came in. And when it did, the perfect world was no longer perfect, because he had given man one thing, and that was free choice. He had given him a mind that was able to reason. He had given him free choice. And God, I still said, well, how? I didn't choose this. So how can you possibly say it's because of this that this happened? And still in my heart, through Scripture, and I have a lot of Scripture here, which I probably won't get to all of it, but he began to show me that he created all of this. He created the whole, what our scientists would call this ecosystem, the whole galaxy, the whole, everything that is. And I believe in John, he says everything that was, he created. But there are laws of nature. And there are things that happen because of the way that God had to set things up for life to perpetuate. And when sin came in, and the free choice, if you notice, it was not long after that sin, the story of Cain and Abel came. We have our first murder in the Bible. Sin began to destroy, and Satan had fallen and had been given free rein. And now this world was different than what God had originally created for us. You know Romans 8:28. You know it inside and out. When I would read this verse, I would say, how can it be for good? And we know that all things, God works for good for those who love him and be called according to his purpose. But then it goes on down there, and it says, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship, persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? It is written, for your sake we face death all day long. We are considered as sheep to the slaughter. But no, all these things, in all these things, we are made more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor demons, neither present nor future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that's in Christ Jesus, our Lord. It rains on the just and the unjust. Because of sin, because there was choice, it's no longer perfect as God made it. But we can be made perfect in his love. So our family, now 3 children, myself. Oh boy, Dad and Mom together, what do you do? Pray. So as God began to help heal my heart, I met a young lady that God brought into my life as a friend. It was through my first cousin, one of those first cousins, that her dad was my mom's brother, and her mom was my dad's sister. But Tammy was going to Circleville Bible College at that time, and she had a friend. Each year we had our own hayride and fall festival, if you want to call it, for our family. It was like a reunion. and my Aunt Mary and Tim had a farm. And so we would always go to the farm and we just have a night of music. And we do some gospel music and we just, eat like crazy. It was just awful. And that was probably sinful, and we would do that and get together. Well, she brought someone home to meet my brother because being through all this, I wasn't ready for any relationship right now. But in that person that she brought home to meet my brother, somehow we met and began to talk. And so over the next year, we had a relationship, and the Lord helped me, and so Lynn and I got married. God to take care of me too. And the reason I want to go on to that part, that was not part of the tragedy, but all of this, God began to heal my heart through what I just read, realizing that those things, if we were strong in Him and looked to Him, that we cannot be separated from them. God never moved. We do. We're the ones that move away from Him. So as He began to draw me back, like the song I sang, Draw Me Close, as He began to draw me back, then He started me in another relationship, a right relationship with a young lady that had a wonderful Christian heritage. Now, my first wife's family, I love them. They are wonderful people, but they were rough. She did not have a great Christian background and heritage. And we were always seemingly the outcasts because we went to church. And now her father did go to church, but it just was one of those things that her mother later began to go to church a lot more. But God gave me, Lynn and her parents have been such a godly influence. They were pastors, 38 years in Clinton, Tennessee, Wesleyan pastors. Still alive today, and we love them. We were up just a few weeks ago. We had a great time together. But they were my kids' grandma and grandpa. And they were the spiritual foundation for my kids to grow up. And so all of them, even the twins and Mary Sue, have been such an influence on my kids. So God gave me, just like Job, He gave me more than I could have ever had I stayed in the same situation. Does it hurt? Sure. But did God take it away from me? No. But God was there when I needed Him. Hard times strengthen us. 2 Corinthians 1:4 says, the God of all comfort comforts us in all our troubles so we can comfort those in trouble. The same comfort that we received from them. And the experience of a disaster like this, whether it's direct or indirect, watching it should soften your heart. You should understand that there is a God, not that He let it happen, but that He cares about what happens to us. None of us know what holds tomorrow. But some of us will face hardship in the future. If we knew what was coming, we would not think that we could go through it. But you know what? We can, and we will, because we have a promise of a loving and faithful God who works good even when bad things happen. I'm going to read it again. And we know all things, God works for good, those who love Him and have been called according to His purpose. And to me, tonight, He's proved that over and over and over. And I don't know why I'm sharing this tonight. God always has something for someone. And it's not an accident that you're here this evening. It's not an accident that I'm here. But I know it may be the slightest bit of encouragement. It may be something to tell someone else that you know that they can make it. It may be comfort. It may be a proclamation that something that's going to happen and that you'll need this to get you through. 2 more verses. In Romans 8 it says, what then shall we say in response to this? If God be for us, then who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son. Do you know that God experienced what I experienced? That he lost his little one for us. He could have stopped it. He could have stopped it. But he did not. And why? Because of you and because of me. So what's God doing in the midst of tragedy? How can there be revival in the midst of disaster? He's doing what he always does. He's loving you. He's caring for you. And he's preparing you for eternity with him. That's exactly what he's doing. So tonight, I don't know where you are. He's calling us to this revival spirit. And I don't know where you are and what's going on in your heart and your life. I don't know what you've been through. I have never, until I came to this revival, I have never been in Kingston, Ohio before. But I know that whatever you face tomorrow, that we have a loving God that has us a peace that will pass all understanding. And in that, he will bring you through to victory.